On a storm-ravaged night in 1932, a lone man stumbled into St. Luke's Hospital in rural Virginia. His clothes were caked with mud, his frame gaunt from hunger, and his trembling hands clutched at his swollen chest, the unmistakable mark of someone carrying a bloodline far beyond human limits. He called himself John Smith, but that name was false. His true name was Samuel Holey, last son of a hidden dynasty buried in the Appalachian Mountains. For 6 generations, his male ancestors lived in a place outsiders whispered about, Devil's Hollow, a valley where strangers vanished, where marriages were dictated by bloodlines, and where secrecy turned into something monstrous. What Samuel carried within him was no ordinary legacy. It was the living product of centuries of inbreeding. For 17 minutes, his newborn son would breathe, a boy whose body defied nature itself. 17 minutes that shocked doctors, haunted researchers, and revealed the darkest genetic collapse ever recorded. Before we unravel this haunting history, make sure you tap like if you enjoy uncovering stories buried in shadows. Subscribe for more forgotten tales, and share this video with a brother or friend who craves chilling history. Drop a comment below. Would you have had the strength to escape Devil's Hollow if you were in Samuel's place? The Appalachian Mountains have always carried legends, yet none darker than Devil's Hollow. In 1847, Jacob Holey led his sons into this secluded valley, creating a hidden dominion where outsiders dared not tread. The valley was encircled by towering cliffs, thick forests, and streams that carved treacherous ravines. Hunters refused to enter. Trappers told stories of strange sounds echoing at night, sounds that carried the weight of something unnatural. Jacob was no ordinary settler. He was a man driven by scandal and whispers too foul to repeat aloud. Rumors of crimes followed him, and only by fleeing could he secure freedom. Alongside him marched his sons, broad-shouldered, silent, obedient to their father's every command. Each boy carried the Holey name like a burden, already indoctrinated into Jacob's rigid vision of control and secrecy. Devil's Hollow became their fortress. The narrow entrance could be easily defended, and Jacob decreed that no outsider should cross its threshold. His word was law, his authority absolute, his dominance unchallenged. Inside this valley, the Holey men built cabins of rough timber, linked by hidden paths known only to themselves. Fires burned at night, illuminating faces hardened by both fear and loyalty. Jacob taught his sons that outsiders were enemies, untrustworthy intruders who could never understand the Holey way. Any contact beyond the valley was forbidden, under punishment as severe as death itself. Isolation was not merely strategy. It was doctrine. Jacob insisted that the Holey bloodline remain pure. His sons would not seek wives, for no women would ever enter the valley. Brothers would unite with brothers. The command was monstrous, yet none dared defy him. Jacob had instilled fear too deeply. Sons were bound to uncles, nephews to cousins, fathers to sons. It was a cycle without end. By 1860, Devil's Hollow thrived with dozens of Holey men. They hunted, fished, and labored. But they also obeyed Jacob's twisted order, creating unions only among themselves, sealing their fate across generations. Strange dialects emerged, words reshaped into a secret language only Holey men could understand. Songs were chanted by firelight, rituals performed under moonlight, always male voices echoing against the cliffs. Local officials avoided the place. Tax collectors vanished. Census takers reported impossible family structures, sons fathering sons who were also brothers. The valley became an island of secrecy untouched by the outside world. Mutations soon appeared. Children were born with twisted limbs, extra digits, and malformed skulls. But Jacob interpreted these deformities not as curses, but as divine proof that the Holeys were chosen. His sons accepted this doctrine. They believed that suffering marked them as sacred, set apart from ordinary men. Each deformity became a badge of honor, reinforcing the cycle of obedience. Stories spread among mountain travelers. Men claimed to hear chanting unlike any language they knew. Others spoke of shadows moving through the trees, shapes that looked human but not entirely natural. Yet no outsider dared intervene. The terrain itself was a barrier, but so was the fear. Men who stumbled too close to Devil's Hollow often disappeared, their names never spoken again. Jacob ruled until his death, but his command survived him. His sons carried the same law, ensuring the Holy line remained bound within itself, a brotherhood cursed by its own devotion. Devil's Hollow was no longer just a valley. It had become a crucible of corruption, where men remade nature in their own image and set the stage for generations of collapse. Jacob Hole's curse began long before Devil's Hollow became infamous. He was a man burdened by scandal, chased by accusations of unspeakable acts with his sons, nephews, and cousins, charges erased but never forgotten. Driven by desperation, Jacob fled society. He carried his sons into the valley, determined to create a world under his control, a kingdom of men bound only to him and his decrees. Jacob's authority was absolute. He commanded obedience through fear, punishing disloyal sons with brutal beatings, starvation, or exile into the wilderness. To defy him was to risk death, or worse, eternal shame. Inside Devil's Hollow, Jacob laid the foundation of his dynasty. He decreed that no woman would ever enter. Sons would lie with brothers, nephews with uncles, fathers with sons. The bloodline concentrated endlessly. Each union twisted natural law further, compounding the curse Jacob had initiated. Sons were born malformed, their bodies carrying the weight of generations collapsing inward. Yet Jacob saw only proof of chosen destiny. Jacob declared these deformities divine marks. Bent spines, extra fingers, hollow eyes, all were celebrated as signs that the Holy men were ascending beyond ordinary mankind. Suffering became the family's sacred inheritance. By 1854, Jacob had expanded his dominion. His sons built cabins deep in the woods, connected by tunnels and hidden paths. Every structure stood as testimony to obedience, secrecy, and the unnatural order he demanded. Government officials gave up entering the valley. Too many vanished without trace. Census men recorded impossibilities. Sons listed as fathers, brothers noted as husbands to brothers. The records defied all logic, yet spoke truth. Jacob tightened his grip through rituals. Fires lit the night, chants echoed, and twisted oaths were sworn. Every man pledged loyalty to the bloodline, sacrificing individuality to maintain the cursed legacy. Whispers spread across nearby mountains. Travelers swore they heard guttural voices carried on the wind, strange chanting that seemed less than human. Dogs refused to cross into the hollow, tails tucked between their legs. Jacob enforced unity through violence. Any man who tried to leave was hunted, dragged back, and broken. Fear became the valley's spine, binding every Holy male into Jacob's unrelenting order. By 1860, Devil's Hollow contained over 40 Holy men. Each bore the deformities of concentrated bloodlines, twisted jaws, shrunken arms, uneven eyes. Yet each remained loyal, believing Jacob's curse was sacred destiny. Unions became darker. Fathers fathered sons with sons. Uncles sired nephews who were also sons. Brothers created offspring indistinguishable from themselves. The Holy tree folded in on itself until branches no longer existed. Jacob told his sons the outside world was corrupt. Only within the hollow could they remain pure, chosen, destined. Outsiders were enemies, not to be trusted, never to be mingled with. The curse deepened as each generation collapsed. Infants wailed with broken lungs, boys crawled where they could not walk, and sons grew into men who could not speak. Still, Jacob declared them holy. Legends spread further. Men in nearby villages whispered that Holes were no longer fully human. Stories told of shadowy figures with hollow eyes watching from cliffs, their twisted bodies illuminated by moonlight. Jacob died in 1871, but his curse lived on. His sons inherited not only the valley, but his monstrous decree. Devil's Hollow became an eternal prison of blood, secrecy, and ruin. The valley was no longer just a home. It was a living experiment in collapse, a dark monument to Jacob's curse, where every Hole son bore the burden of his father's obsession. When Jacob Hole died in 1871, his legacy fell into the hands of his eldest son, Thomas. Unlike his calculating father, Thomas was reckless, impulsive, and ruled by primal urges unchecked by reason. Years of inbreeding had already warped the Hole sons. Twisted jaws, uneven limbs, and hollow stares marked their bodies. Yet Thomas saw these deformities not as warnings, but as divine signatures of chosen blood. Thomas declared that every deformity was proof of holiness. Bent spines became symbols of strength, hollow eyes became visions of prophecy, and malformed hands were celebrated as gifts from forces greater than ordinary men. Under Thomas, the valley's isolation grew absolute. Any Hole male who dared to speak to outsiders was beaten, shackled, or left to rot in underground pits. Secrecy was survival, and silence was sacred. Rituals intensified. Fires blazed higher, chants grew louder, and Hole brothers bound themselves in twisted unions decreed by Thomas. Sons were paired with fathers, cousins with uncles, until lineage folded upon itself endlessly. Visitors who stumbled into Devil's Hollow never returned. Locals spoke of chilling howls and screams echoing through the forest, sounds that carried no human rhythm. Men whispered that the Holes were transforming into something other. Deformities became unbearable. Sons were born without legs, others with arms fused together, some with eyes set impossibly wide. But Thomas proclaimed these horrors sacred, visions of a higher destiny carved into flesh. Brothers obeyed because fear demanded it. Thomas was violent, prone to uncontrollable rage. Any son who defied him was lashed, maimed, or forced into humiliating rituals before the entire Hole brotherhood. The valley's cabins grew darker. Walls carved with symbols, effigies shaped from bone, and altars stained with blood told the story of a brotherhood spiraling further from the world of ordinary men. By 1880, Devil's Hollow housed over 60 Hole men. None ventured beyond the cliffs. Outsiders who tried to map the land vanished, leaving behind broken tools, scattered tracks, and silence that swallowed their names. Thomas's decrees grew more twisted. He claimed that suffering was enlightenment, and that broken sons would one day ascend as gods. His word was final, his vision unquestioned, his madness absolute. Hole boys crawled in mud where others learned to walk. Many could not speak, their minds lost in confusion. Yet Thomas declared their silence sacred, proof that words were unworthy of chosen blood. Every generation compounded the collapse. Sons fathered brothers who became fathers themselves. The tree of life folded tighter and tighter, a spiral of endless male connections bound by secrecy and obedience. Legends spread across Appalachia. Men in distant towns swore they saw shadows on ridgelines, twisted silhouettes moving unnaturally, their forms bent, their eyes glowing under moonlight like predators hunting in silence. The Hole men themselves believed the legends. They saw their deformities as holy marks, believing they were no longer entirely human but destined to surpass the outside world's corrupted, ordinary blood. Thomas ruled until his death, leaving behind dozens of sons and brothers marked by collapse. His dominion had turned Devil's Hollow into a nightmare, a living laboratory of suffering, secrecy, and twisted faith. By the end of his reign, Devil's Hollow was no longer a refuge. It was a prison forged from blood and fear, where every Hole son was both victim and enforcer of the curse. Thomas's dominion ensured the curse would thrive. Each broken son carried the weight of his father's decree, ensuring Devil's Hollow remained a fortress of ruin, a place no ordinary man would dare enter. Samuel Holay entered the world in 1912, born within the crumbling cabins of Devil's Hollow. His father was also his uncle, his grandfather also his brother, every branch twisted into itself. From his first breath, Samuel carried signs of collapse. His skull bore irregular ridges, one arm shortened unnaturally, and his legs trembled with weakness. Yet his survival was hailed as miraculous among Holay men. Unlike many brothers who perished at birth, Samuel endured. His cries echoed through the valley, and Holay fathers declared him destined to embody the bloodline's will, proof their cursed lineage could still breathe. Samuel grew amid shadows of secrecy. He learned to walk along uneven floors of rotting cabins, taught by older brothers whose own bodies bore deformities so severe they could barely guide him upright. By age 4, Samuel showed unusual strength. Though thin and fragile, he remembered chants, copied strange symbols carved into wooden walls, and repeated the coded dialect invented by Holay fathers to preserve secrecy. His intelligence drew attention. While other sons faltered, Samuel absorbed knowledge, memorizing genealogies that made outsiders shudder. He understood connections, fathers who were also brothers, sons who were also uncles, lines without end. The Holay men treated Samuel as a prodigy. They gathered around him during rituals, encouraging him to recite oaths by firelight. He became a symbol of survival in a brotherhood drowning in collapse. Yet Samuel's body reminded him of fragility. His skull throbbed constantly, his limbs twisted painfully. Older brothers whispered he would not reach adulthood. But Samuel defied their doubts with stubborn resilience. Devil's Hollow offered no comfort. Every day was marked by screams of malformed infants, boys gasping for breath, and sons broken by genetic ruin. Samuel grew amid echoes of despair and devotion. By adolescence, Samuel had become unusually perceptive. He noticed how rituals masked decay, how chants disguised fear. He studied older fathers' deformed faces, recognizing the price secrecy demanded across generations. Samuel endured punishments for asking questions. His uncle Father Abel whipped him for speaking of the outside world. Yet punishment sharpened his determination. He resolved one day to challenge the curse. His first 2 sons were born lifeless, fragile bodies collapsing within hours. These losses carved despair into Samuel's spirit, but also hardened his resolve. He swore the next son would not die within Devil's Hollow. Whispers spread among Holay men that Samuel might break tradition. Some feared him, others admired him. His intelligence made him dangerous. His defiance made him unpredictable, and his determination made him unforgettable. Samuel carried secrecy but also rebellion. In hidden corners, he sketched crude maps of escape, memorizing routes through forests and rivers he had never traveled but imagined as lifelines beyond cursed cliffs. By 20, Samuel was both victim and visionary. His body bore deformities, yet his mind burned with clarity. He saw Devil's Hollow for what it was, a prison of brothers. The older fathers distrusted him. They assigned watchers, brothers who shadowed his movements. Still Samuel studied, planning silently, his mind filled with a single thought. His next son must be born beyond the hollow. Every night Samuel whispered to the unborn child inside him, promising survival. He swore his son would not be swallowed by rituals, not broken by secrecy, not chained to Devil's Hollow. Samuel's birth had been a miracle within the curse. But his destiny was to become something more. The first Holay son in generations to imagine escape and defiance against centuries of collapse. By late October 1932, Samuel Holay had reached his breaking point. He knew the valley was a prison built by fathers, guarded by brothers, and destined to consume his unborn son forever. The decision to leave grew slowly. Samuel had memorized hidden paths, mapped ravines, and calculated risks. He knew brothers patrolled every trail, but his determination to save his son outweighed every danger. On the night of the new moon, Samuel slipped into darkness. Clutching stolen coins from his uncle's chest, he wrapped himself in a cloak stitched by brothers and stepped beyond cursed cabins. His body was weakened by years of hunger. Malformed bones ached with every step. Yet Samuel pressed forward, whispering to his unborn son, promising survival beyond Devil's Hollow, swearing the curse would end. He crossed frozen streams barefoot, blood mixing with ice. Branches tore his skin, yet he continued. Every sound of breaking twigs made him fear brothers were chasing, but no shadows emerged. Samuel slept in hollowed logs, curled against the cold. He dreamed of chanting brothers, twisted rituals, and screams of dying sons. Each nightmare fueled his resolve. His son must live differently. By dawn, he chewed bitter roots and drank stream water. Hunger gnawed his ribs, but despair was worse. Behind him, Devil's Hollow pulsed like a wound he could never allow his son to inherit. 3 days into the journey, exhaustion nearly killed him. His knees buckled, his breath shallow. Yet he rose again, clutching his chest, whispering that his son's life was worth every shattered step. Storm clouds gathered. Rain lashed the mountains, turning trails to mud. Samuel stumbled, crawling through sludge, his malformed limbs trembling. Lightning illuminated cliffs, each flash reminding him of the prison he had escaped. At night he heard echoes, voices of brothers chanting, though none were near. His mind twisted with fear, yet he pushed forward, repeating his vow that his son would never return. On the third night, Samuel collapsed beside a dirt road. His body shook with fever, lips cracked, chest heaving. He muttered about devils, curses, and sons buried beneath unmarked graves. A traveling salesman named Robert Welsh discovered him. Welsh lifted Samuel into his vehicle, shocked by his appearance, his archaic speech, and his trembling grip. Samuel begged only for his son's survival. Welsh carried Samuel to St. Luke's Hospital. Doctors examined his deformed frame, his sunken eyes, and his hollow voice. They recognized suffering but could not yet imagine the horror he carried within. Samuel registered under the false name John Smith. He claimed to be a deserted man, abandoned by brothers. His dialect revealed isolation. His scars revealed torment. His silence concealed generations of ruin. For the first time in his life, Samuel lay in a bed unguarded by Holy brothers. Yet the shadows of Devil's Hollow followed him, whispering chants that clawed at his mind. The stolen coins barely covered his admission, but Samuel clutched them tightly. Every cent was a bridge toward his son's freedom, away from the valley where bloodlines collapsed under secrecy. Samuel endured sleepless nights, haunted by visions of twisted brothers watching from cliffs. He feared they would storm the hospital, drag him back, and bind his son to the curse. Yet Samuel remained. His escape was complete. His son would be born not under firelight rituals or broken chants, but in the hands of men outside Devil's Hollow. His defiance had begun. The cold November night pressed against the walls of St. Luke's Hospital. Inside, Samuel Holey lay trembling, surrounded by doctors who had no idea what horrors his bloodline had carried across generations. Labor began slowly. Samuel's malformed pelvis and the child's impossible position confounded every medical expectation. Doctors exchanged nervous glances. No manual, no textbook had prepared them for what they were about to confront. Samuel gritted his teeth, gripping the sheets. He whispered broken chants inherited from fathers, words once twisted by ritual, now transformed into pleas for strength. His son's life depended on every breath. Hours passed. Samuel's body weakened. Pain tore through his malformed frame, yet his determination never faltered. He had not crossed mountains and rivers to surrender here, so close to freedom for his son. Finally, the child emerged. Gasps filled the room. The doctors recoiled at the sight of a body warped by generations of collapse. The boy lived, but his form bore the curse of centuries. His skull elongated unnaturally, eyes bulged, one arm missing entirely, while the other bore 7 fingers fused grotesquely. His legs were joined as one, a twisted column of bone that defied anatomy. The doctors scrambled. Standard procedures failed. Oxygen masks did not fit. IVs could not be placed. Measurements defied reason. Every instrument of modern medicine seemed powerless against the boy's impossible form. Inside, the child's heart beat erratically, lungs gasped unevenly, nerves sparked with irregular rhythm. Each moment of survival was fragile, yet undeniable. The boy clung to life with raw, inexplicable force. Dr. Edmund Carver, a geneticist summoned from the University of Virginia, arrived swiftly. He recognized the truth instantly. The boy was the product of extreme consanguinity, fathers and sons sharing over 90% of DNA. Carver documented meticulously. He sketched deformities, photographed impossible limbs, and collected tissue samples. He understood this was unprecedented, the culmination of secrecy and collapse hidden in Devil's Hollow for 6 generations. The doctors, though hardened by experience, could not hide their horror. Some muttered prayers, others simply stared. They had not delivered a son. They had witnessed a genetic nightmare incarnate. Samuel, exhausted, watched calmly. His hollow eyes betrayed no surprise. He had always known the truth. His son was cursed from conception, yet still he lived, and that life mattered beyond everything. 17 minutes passed. The boy breathed, twitched, and strained. Each second was eternity. Each heartbeat carried the echoes of brothers, fathers, and grandfathers who had damned him before he was even born. Then silence. The heartbeat faltered, lungs collapsed, and the boy's fragile body grew still. The room froze in uneasy quiet. 17 minutes of life had ended, but history had been rewritten forever. Carver stared at the lifeless body with awe and dread. He knew this was no ordinary death. It was a revelation, proof of what isolation, secrecy, and male obsession had wrought. Samuel accepted the truth with eerie composure. His son had lived, however briefly, beyond Devil's Hollow. That was his victory, a defiance against generations of fathers who had chained their bloodline. Doctors wrapped the body with respect. Carver gathered evidence. Samuel closed his eyes, whispering to his son. 17 minutes of breath had become a monument, a warning carved into the fabric of science. Devil's Hollow had produced its darkest child, yet in those 17 minutes, Samuel's act of escape gave the world knowledge, and his son became the embodiment of both ruin and resistance. Dr. Edmund Carver returned to the University of Virginia shaken. He had witnessed the boy's 17-minute life, and now he carried the responsibility of preserving every detail in secret, away from careless interpretation. Carver began constructing a hidden archive. He stored photographs of the malformed body, tissue samples sealed carefully, and pages of handwritten notes. Each record was labeled meticulously, documenting collapse across 6 generations of Holy men. The deeper Carver studied, the darker the picture became. Family trees twisted into circles, sons who were simultaneously brothers, fathers who sired uncles, and lineages so collapsed they defied the natural order of heredity. Carver's calculations revealed a chilling truth. The Holy bloodline had surpassed 90% genetic similarity. Only identical twins could match such compression. It was a living experiment in collapse, carried across decades of secrecy. He examined each deformity in detail. Twisted limbs, fused ribs, hollow skulls, and malformed organs were not isolated accidents. They were accumulated scars of fathers, binding sons in endless unions within Devil's Hollow. Carver understood the moral danger. If revealed recklessly, the case might fuel dangerous ideologies already spreading in the 1930s. He swore to keep the archive hidden until society could handle its implications. For decades, Carver worked in silence. He added sketches of unmarked graves uncovered by travelers, rumors of chanting brothers, and testimonies of men who swore they heard inhuman sounds in Appalachian forests. He reconstructed the Hole genealogy with precision. Every father, every son, every uncle was cataloged. His diagrams looked less like family trees and more like circles of collapse spiraling endlessly inward. Carver's notes described not only physical collapse but mental decay. Many Hole sons never learned to speak. Others wandered with hollow stares, unable to recognize brothers standing directly in front of them. In private journals, Carver wrote with dread. He described Devil's Hollow as a prison built by men against themselves, where fathers imposed decrees that turned blood into poison and obedience into annihilation. The archive grew into dozens of locked cabinets. Carver alone possessed the key. He feared exploitation, yet he also knew the knowledge could prevent other isolated groups from repeating the same catastrophic fate. He traveled quietly across Appalachia, gathering whispers. Men in distant towns spoke of shadows, unearthly chants, and wandering boys with twisted limbs. Each account reinforced what Carver already knew. The Hollow still whispered. By the 1950s, Carver had compiled more than 4 decades of evidence, photographs yellowed with age, tissue samples sealed in glass, genealogies inked in trembling hands. Each artifact spoke of secrecy, collapse, and warning. Carver's obsession consumed him. He withdrew from colleagues, avoiding conferences, preferring solitude with his notes. His life's work became a shrine to the 17-minute son, the cursed boy who had embodied 6 generations. Even as his health faltered, Carver remained vigilant. He wrote letters instructing trusted colleagues to preserve the archive after his death, warning that the Hole saga was too important to be forgotten. By the 1970s, Carver knew time was short. He prepared the archive for release, ensuring photographs, charts, and samples could withstand years. His legacy would be truth, delivered when the world was ready. In 1984, terminally ill yet resolute, Carver finally prepared his findings for publication. The Hole saga would no longer remain whispered legend. The world would confront Devil's Hollow, its secrecy, and its cursed bloodline. When Dr. Edmund Carver's archive finally surfaced, it shocked every researcher who read it. The records revealed not myths, but living proof of what isolation and obsessive decrees had done to generations of Hole men. Historians pored over charts showing sons who were also uncles, fathers who were also brothers, and grandfathers who were also cousins. No ordinary lineage could collapse so completely without secrecy forcing it forward. The 17-minute son became legend. His malformed body, preserved in sketches and photographs, stood as undeniable evidence of collapse. 17 minutes of breath told the entire story of Devil's Hollow more powerfully than words. Scientists recognized Carver's work as both warning and revelation. The Hole case showed what happened when bloodlines folded endlessly inward, when fathers chained sons to decrees that defied both morality and biology. For locals, the Hollow remained cursed ground. Men refused to hunt there, trappers avoided its borders, and stories of chanting voices echoed through taverns for decades. The valley's shadow remained long after abandonment. Explorers who entered in the 1990s found only ruins. Cabins collapsed under vines, altars broken, fire pits filled with ash. Bones lay scattered in shallow graves, each skull carrying deformities etched by generations. Every bone told a story. Twisted jaws, hollow sockets, and fused limbs confirmed Carver's archive. No single artifact spoke louder than the land itself, a graveyard carved by obedience to one patriarch's curse. Samuel Hole's escape remained singular. He alone had carried a son beyond the Hollow, even if for 17 minutes. His defiance stood as testament that obedience was not inevitable, that choice was possible. Modern geneticists studied Carver's archive with reverence. They recognized parallels in other isolated groups, using the Hole example as cautionary tale. The 17-minute sun became symbol not of horror alone, but of prevention. Ethicists debated endlessly. Was Carver right to keep the archive secret for decades? Could the story have saved others sooner? Or did releasing it later preserve its message without misuse? Regardless of debate, Devil's Hollow entered history. Textbooks referenced the case, documentaries whispered of the 17-minute sun, and scholars invoked the Holes whenever speaking of isolation, secrecy, and the dangers of unchecked patriarchal decrees. The Hollow itself returned to silence. Forest reclaimed cabins, rivers eroded paths, and wildlife crept back into spaces once guarded by brothers with sharpened spears. Nature erased what men had once imposed, yet legends persisted. Hunters swore they still heard chants on windless nights. Travelers reported shadows moving along cliffs, silhouettes bent unnaturally, reminders that echoes of cursed blood still lingered in the valley's memory. For descendants beyond the mountains, the story became myth. Men told tales of ancestors twisted by secrecy, using the Hole name as warning to sons about what blind obedience could unleash. Samuel's act stood apart. He had carried his son into the world outside, however briefly. That defiance became the ultimate legacy. A single man choosing survival over submission, rebellion over ruin. Carver's archive closed with haunting words. The Hole sons were not monsters. They were men bound by chains forged by their fathers. Let their suffering stand as lesson, not spectacle. Today, Devil's Hollow remains uninhabited. No brothers gather, no fires burn, no chants echo. Yet the story endures, a reminder that bloodlines built on secrecy and control will always collapse inward. The legacy of Devil's Hollow is not merely genetic. It is moral. It warns every son, every father, every brother. Obedience without reason, secrecy without mercy, will always carve ruin into generations.